Hello and welcome back to UK Column. I'm delighted today to be able to welcome Susan Mason. And as everybody knows, well, as I hope you do know, I'm Debbie Evans and I'm the nursing correspondent for UK Column. Now, Susan Mason has been talking to our education seminar that some of you may not have seen. But we had lots of comments to bring her back. And the reason that we're bringing her back and we're delighted to receive her back is because we want to be asking what is going on behind school doors. Do you know what's going on with your children, your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews? What are your children being taught behind those school doors? And more importantly, who is teaching them? Do you know? Now, Susan Mason founded Schoolgate Campaign back in 2019 to bring awareness about sex education and how relationship education was entering our schools. And she's done an awful lot of work on this. And I think that this interview is going to be incredibly important for everybody to share because we really do need to know what is going on behind school doors and we would like to tell you. So without further ado, let me welcome Susan, who's hopefully going to answer many of those questions. And Susan, please give us a brief introduction into yourself and how you started the campaign and what made you start the campaign to ask those vital questions that we all need to know the answers to.
Oh, thank you, Debbie, for having me today. Yes, it does go back quite a few years now, I suppose. Um, uh, I became aware of issues to do with sex education, and that there's some abuses going on in schools to do with that. There was a publication of a booklet by the Christian Institute called Too Much Too Young, and I think the sort of the second half of that book has a lot of examples of programs and content in programs that were in use at that time, and I have no reason to believe that that has changed. And then I learned later on that there was a new legislation going to be debated and was eventually passed, and that was the Relationships and Sex Education Regulations, and they came in 2019. And that sort of expanded the reach of the state as to what they would be telling our children and other people's children about sex, sexuality, and gender. Um, and I was very concerned because it seemed that parents weren't necessarily going to be made aware, although in the legislation itself, it does require that schools consult with parents about this. Um, in reality, there certainly schools weren't even aware that they needed to do that. There were others that sort of watered it down to a sort of engagement and just telling parents what they were going to do. And if there was sort of any pushback or objection by the parents in some schools, that was ignored, even if in the legislation itself it was saying that it needed to be appropriate for the age of the children, and the parents were saying no, this is not appropriate for the age much. I don't want them being taught this at this stage, or they had a religious concern, which is also covered in the regulations. There must be teaching mindful of the religious background of the pupil itself. So we've had quite a few issues. The early adopters took things up in September 2019. So there were hundreds of schools that started teaching RSC at that point. And formally, it was to start in September 2020. Then, because of the COVID restrictions and schools being closed some of that time and so forth, that was actually extended for a second year. So, effectively, in theory, all schools have consulted parents about RSC as of the end of last academic year. But we are continuing to hear of problems and issues, and in fact there have been legal cases as well, and uh, requests for several requests for judicial review. One is ongoing in Wales at the moment. But that's a different legislation. It's similar. It's going in the same direction.
Susan, now for everybody watching and listening, Susan's got an amazing website with a toolkit, loads of resources, loads of information, and we'll put all of that in the article beneath this interview. But Susan, what I want to ask, and I actually know the answer, and I'm completely shocked, is how old are these children when they're taught? Now, I believe there's a different regulation in Wales, and we've seen a lot of activity amongst parent groups in Wales, but there's a slightly different age group depending on the country, isn't there? So, and also, what kind of examples, what are our children being taught? I mean, just some examples that you've heard of.
The RSC education is from the age of 4. It is from the first year in school, and I have to say, with sex education, and this has always been the case, there is an absolute right of parents to withdraw their child from lessons should they choose to. Now, that said, do the parents know that the sex ed is being taught? They're not necessarily told about it, nor are they taught about their right to withdraw their child. And similarly, in secondary school, there is now, it used to be an absolute right to withdraw, it is now a right to request withdrawal in secondary schools. But what happens with introducing relationships education is that arguably that's where same-sex relationships would be covered, for example, which of course, if it's to do with sexuality, is in fact a sex ed issue. But so it's muddying the waters by putting it under another name, or further under health, or one of these other titles. But in fact, the law is the same, that anything to do with sex education, whether it's badged that way or not, and whatever subject it turns up in, parents have an absolute right to withdraw their child from sex ed in primary, and to request that withdrawal in secondary up to a certain age, up until just before 16. So, but as I say, many parents aren't aware that it's being taught, or that they have that right. Now, with relationships education, if it's classified as that, there is no right to withdraw, and that's from the age of 4. Examples that we've come across in the early stages, there was a program called All About Me. And this was being recommended by the Warwickshire County Council to over 240 schools. And in that program, it encourages self-stimulation for infants' children. And it took the threat of legal action to make the council withdraw its recommendation to schools. So it was successful in that level. We have no, we don't know if schools then changed anything, but we know that the council no longer recommends it. A Birmingham teacher was told a mother that there was actually none of her business what was being taught to her child in the school, and that's actually breaking the law. There was an example of a mother in Hull who was outraged, and this was during the lockdown times, that she found out pornography research and other sexuality homework had been given to her 11-year-old child. Schools have been known to act unlawfully and push a problematic ideological agenda. The Educate and Celebrate program, which is like a third-party program that is often used by schools, is not neutral. It actually aims, it's got a stated aim, to smash heteronormativity, as they call it. And the No Outsiders program, which was protested by in Birmingham in 2019, and attracted a lot of media attention. That is based on a government, as in taxpayer-funded project, to do with queering the primary classroom. So that's to challenge sexuality and gender. There are some head teachers who refused to listen to parents' complaints. So in Heavers Farm Primary School in Croydon, children were forced from the age of 4 to participate in LGBT pride celebrations against many parents' wishes. We've also had the outrage in the Hollymount Primary School last year, where a drag queen was invited in to entertain, in inverted commas, educate 5 to 9 year olds, and that included sort of a provocative dance and so forth. So these are just some examples of things that have actually happened in schools. So it's important to understand that we've got 3 levels here really. We've got the legislation, which in itself, at first reading, you'd say is probably fairly innocuous. There's probably one thing that I'd question in it, but then you've got a raft of the government guidance, um, most of which is neutral. Some of it's helpful, but a lot of it's not helpful. And if schools do not understand that they're not obliged actually to follow any of the guidance. They may need to have a reason why they are not following particular guidance, but it's not law. Basically, the guidance is not law. So we've got the legislation itself, we've got the guidance, and then we've got what's actually happening in the field and in the schools themselves. And that can be different again, as I've illustrated with those examples.
Susan, statutory guidance has always been my big bugbear, in the way that I don't believe that the words statutory and guidance should go together. They don't seem to match, and as you've quite rightly said, they're not law. We've covered many times on UK Column the drag queens going into primary schools and other educational establishments. When parents send their children to school, and I'm a mum, I'm a grandmum, when our children walk through those school doors, generally now those school doors are locked. Back in my day, parents could come and go and pop in and see the receptionist or what, but now there's locks. So your children are behind locked doors. Are parents being allowed into any of these sessions with their children? Are they being allowed to see the material that their children are being taught? Can they access it online as it's part of the, in inverted commas, curriculum? Can parents actually get their hands on this material to see what their children are being taught behind those locked school doors, which invariably, once the child's in school, unless school have given permission for the child to leave, they're there until pickup time? So can we get that information?
Well, the law requires that each school decide how they're going to fulfil the requirements of the legislation in conjunction with a consultation with parents. Um, so, as I say, this may or may not actually happen, and it may take different forms. Potentially there are as many RSC deliveries of content as there are schools in the country. That said, in the guidance, one of the few helpful things is a recommendation that samples of the what is going to be taught, and obviously the most sensitive is the most important, um, should be made available to parents. Now that we've come across issues here because the samples will be selective and not the important ones. No samples are available, or because the content is being provided by a third party, there are issues with copyright, and the school said, "Well, we're actually not allowed to show you what's going to be taught to your child and because of copyright." And there was one lady. I think her surname is Page, recently, and she was invited. Well, I suppose what we could do is we could let you come in and have an eyeball, have a look on the desk, flick through, and that should satisfy you. But she knew her rights and the law well enough to know, well, actually, if I do that, I won't be able to take anything away. I won't be, and quite possibly there'll be some sort of non-disclosure thing. I won't be able to talk about it. So it's actually a way of shutting me down. So we have all these complications. We certainly have people in official capacity saying how this is problematic and should not be happening, but it is happening. So parents are really, in some schools, I'm not saying all schools are delivering bad RSE by any, but I'm saying there is definitely an issue here where parents are being prevented from seeing what is actually being taught on very sensitive subjects to their children.
And I think that's extremely worrying. And in fact, everything that you're saying, I feel, is extremely worrying. The cascade of information that's obviously going into schools, and it's similar, really, in my profession within nursing, within medicine. Nobody's really quite sure of who they're seeing, what they're being told, and it seems now that parents need to know what their children are being told. They need to be told what their children are being taught. And a subject close to my heart, many of our regular viewers and listeners will know I have a special interest in special educational needs, and I have a PG cert in autism. And currently, 1 in 20 children, or that was the latest statistic. I'm sure it's a far higher number now. But 1 in 20 within mainstream school are special educational needs, so therefore are deemed vulnerable. Susan, have you heard from any parents as to the effects of what happens when a child comes home from school after they've been taught? We don't know what they're being taught, but are they bringing home any material? Are any of them expressing concern or anxiety, or maybe some of them are being told not to speak to their parents about what they're being told? What are the effects that we're seeing on children? And I believe the age limit in Wales, is it 3 years old in Wales and 4 years old in England? What are the effects on our children?
Well, there are different effects. I think with some children, they are coming home and questioning, and this is what happened with the No Outsiders program, um, where a child told her, so I don't know if it's his or her mother, I can have two, you can have two mummies and two daddies. That was the first that that parent knew about it. In other cases, they can actually be so traumatized that they won't actually say anything. I know of a child in sort of year 6 who, in the whole mixed class, was shown a video um, where the children were sort of covering their eyes and looking away. It's a sex ed video. When she went back home, she told her parents about other aspects of the sex ed day, but not that. So, this can be a result of, trauma that's actually happened. So the kids will not always speak up about it.
What are teachers doing about this? I mean, are you hearing anything from teachers? Because I mean, who is teaching this? I mean, I know from experience with regards to special educational needs that teachers aren't taught, they maybe get half a day during their teacher training on special educational needs. What kind of are these mainstream teachers that are teaching this sex ed and relationship training, or are we outsourcing this training to anybody? And if so, who?
Well, certainly, as I say, schools choose how they're going to fulfil the requirements of the regulation on a case by case basis. So there will certainly be some in-house provision. And I remember one interviewer saying she was very pleased about how they chose to deliver their education. They were going to talk about this in primary school. They're going to talk about fish to do with reproduction, but yeah, teachers understandably are not feeling this is their area of expertise. So there is a huge industry out there of these third party providers. Now, these third party providers are not experts in child development, and that's what they need to be, actually. So there's no guarantee that the programs that these people produce and bring into the classroom are going to be actually appropriate for the age and stage of the children. And this age appropriate term is fiercely contested because while the state is saying this is the age and stage your child should have this, and they're doing that kind of through the schools and through these organisations. Parents are saying, no, that is not, my child is not at the age and stage where I wish for them to do that. And I know them personally, it's not the right time to be introducing these things to them. So yes, we have a bit of a dog's dinner here in England about that.
you actually send out leaflets, don't you? You say to parents, if you want leaflets to hand out to friends, family, we will send them to you because you're so desperate to get awareness to all of this. And I think, to be fair, many parents don't know about this. They're not aware about it. They're not hearing about it on mainstream media. They're not hearing about it in their newspapers. For anybody watching this video, I think it's really important that you share it. Please share it with parents, because parents will want to know. Every parent wants to know what their child is being taught. Every parent has a right to know what their child is being taught. And every parent has a choice, because at the end of the day, every parent has that choice whether to educate their child in those issues themselves or not. So, what can parents do in simple steps? I mean, without going down the legal route, and I'm sure we'll get into what parents' legal rights are. But in the first instance, you hear at the school gate, oh, by the way, my son or my daughter in maybe the year above has had this education. It's coming down to your child in their year. What does a parent do? Do they go and talk to the head teacher? Do they speak to the board of governors? Where's their first step of communication? Who do they inquire to? And what can they expect to be told?
Well, the law requires that a policy for RSE needs to be put together, and that it needs to be consulted on between the teachers and the parents. So that's the law. This policy needs to be made available to anyone who asks for it, and that means anyone, not just someone who has a child at the school. Generally, these policies are on the website. I mean, not always, but these days that's usually where you would find them. So, if a person wanted to know about a particular school, the first step would probably be to look at the website, look at the policy for RSE. And a policy is not there's not a bunch of lesson plans, but the policy will give an indication of the leaning of the school, how family friendly, how traditionally family friendly they actually are, how good they look like they are with safeguarding and so forth. So that's your first step. As a parent in the school, then if there's something that's actually come up from a class, then initially you would take it up with the teacher, and then probably escalate through to the head teacher, and then the governors. If you're really not getting any satisfaction lower down.
Are
Um,
there any exemptions, Susan? Are there, because I know that when we've previously spoken, we've spoken about religious exclusion. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
The regulations themselves say that the teaching must have in mind the religious background of the pupil. That's it, really. Now, and that's actually been ignored quite a lot in the examples that we've seen. But going back further, we have, of course, the Human Rights Act of 1998, which states, paraphrasing it, that parents have the right to receive education for their children that is in accordance with their own religious and philosophical beliefs. So the Human Rights Act has not been repealed, neither has that section been amended. So this still stands.
So we're seeing a lot of LBGTQ education being rolled out. Is there a legal requirement for that?
Well, for primary school, which is what the Schoolgate campaign focuses on, there is no legal requirement to address any LGBT elements. Neither is there any requirement to teach the Equalities Act. There is a public sector equalities duty, I think it's called, to make sure that you are protecting the particular named characteristics, and also maintaining harmony between individuals that may represent different characteristics in the class and in the school.
Susan, are there any, you've been doing this work since 2019, and please do go and look at Susan's website, and the link will be beneath this interview. Are there any schools rowing back against this? Who have you got supporting you? Is there anyone else? Or are you a lone voice? Because clearly every parent should be looking at your website and requesting some of your leaflets and supporting you, because clearly this is really a subject where I genuinely believe that parents are not aware. So is there any good news on the horizon? Are there any schools rowing against this?
Yes, we have had some successes, definitely. Yes, we have sort of schools in Bradford. What happens with the successful schools is, and you don't hear from them again once they've got their win. They go away. And yeah, there was a lady a couple of weeks ago who was in a sort of consultation meeting with the school, and sort of armed with the information from not only my website but other areas. She was able to say, no, what the school was saying was a load of rubbish. We have to do this, we have to do that. No, you don't. It's not law. And there were other parents there who were very unhappy, but they didn't have the information um, uh, to sort of stand up and let the school know. But yeah, it is there, and in fact, as we've said, that the law is actually on the parents' side. But it's only if you actually apply it to your situation, that it has any worth. And that's where things are often falling down. But yes, definitely, we have had successes, and as far as other organisations are concerned, um, you can ask for advice from an organisation called Parent Power. This is parentpower.family, and also and that's for general sex ed or LGBT issues. And Safe Schools Alliance has had some wins. They usually have to do it with the threat of legal action, sadly, but um, they sort of pushed back against this transgender indoctrination, and also transgender trend would be good to give advice. And as far as sort of good and bad RSC resources are concerned, rather, if the school were to be proposing, oh well, we'd love to have this sex-wise program, we think it's great, to say, well, actually, no, I prefer that you use a different one. There is RSC Review will give information about some of the programs that are already out there, and you can have highlights of what may be good or bad about them.
I really want to highlight to everybody that on Susan's website is an amazing toolkit. So there's loads of information that you can grab from that. And also, Susan, you do a blog as well, don't you? And you've been very successful in highlighting the work of Mermaid. And we've also, on UK Column, highlighted the work of Mermaids. I wonder if you could just give us a little insight into your campaign to raise awareness with regards to them.
Yes, I think it just there was a deluge of articles in one particular time. I thought, yes, I need to write a blog about them. But yes, that they are going into talking to teachers, I believe, and training them and making them into mermaids, whether they like it or not. I think was the more or less the comment on the end of one training when someone raised a question about it. So yeah, I don't try to have any particular interest in a particular organisation, but I will highlight if it looks like there's quite a bit of activity and quite a bit of news over a certain organisation like Mermaids. Obviously, Stonewall, they are taxpayer funded. The good news about them is that a lot of government organisations and other organisations have withdrawn their membership of their champions Stonewall Champions program, and overall, I think there's a sense that the public support is just not there. So we just need more of that to happen.
And I'm hoping very much we've got an amazing, amazing audience, incredible viewers and listeners. And I know that they will all share your website and share your work. Before I hand over to you for the last word, Susan. And I know that hopefully you'll agree to come back and talk to us again because there's so much more to explore. And this is a very fast moving area, so we need to keep our eyes on it because parents need to have the knowledge in which to consent for their children to receive an education, and clearly they're not getting this. And I think the big takeaway message is that parents, you don't have to put up with this, and schools, you don't have to do this. So I think the information has been absolutely fascinating but horrifying. Susan, I'm not going to lie, I'm firmly of the belief that children should be in the playground, socializing with each other, climbing trees, getting grubby, going to parties and having fun, and not learning about this agenda in this way, at this age, in this format, without any parental knowledge. So on that note, I'm going to thank you so much because I think this has been a shocking but very informative interview, and one that people will hopefully share. Please go to Susan's website. All the links will be beneath. And on that note, Susan, thank you so much for agreeing to come to UK Column News and tell us all about this. And I'll hand over to you for the last word. Thank you, Susan.
While all schools will not deliver bad RSE, significant issues have already emerged over teaching about sex, sexuality, and gender. Other groups quite rightly might continue to lobby the government with sound research and other evidence that demonstrates that this approach to RSE is not best for our children. But experience indicates that these actions alone will not change the direction our nation is going in. Only grassroots action will make the difference. So Schoolgate campaign is looking for people, especially parents, who care enough about children to count the cost, sharing information and standing up for them. The government, or shall we say nanny state, ignored the results of the public RSE consultation, which was overwhelmingly negative to proposals. Sound mainstream child development expertise is often ignored. Therefore, curriculum content cannot be guaranteed to be appropriate for the age and stage of the children. Parental rights enshrined in the Human Rights Act have been ignored. So the state is actually breaking the law. And religious rights, including the protection of a religious characteristic in the Equalities Act, has been ignored, making it in fact the Inequalities Act. The nanny state has ignored many concerns of those promoting the health and well-being of children when they voice concerns about the ill-advised nature of this curriculum. So it's up to us then. It's important that parents, teachers, and all those concerned about the well-being of children take a stand to protect them from confusion and premature sexualization in schools. Nanny does not know best.